Hi, I'm Joan Maneri. I'm the Executive Director of the Veatch program. On Tuesday, October the 18th, the Veatch Board of Governors welcomed Aaron Dorfman to come and speak with us via Zoom to discuss the role of the Veatch program and the significance of the work that we support within the current landscape of philanthropy. Aaron Dorfman is President and CEO of the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, or NCRP. He's been in this role since 2008, and it is an understatement to call him our longtime partner. We really rely on Aaron and the amazing team he's assembled at NCRP to have a handle on the philanthropic sector and a cutting-edge analysis of what works and what more is needed to support our grantees. I am so grateful for his leadership and for his fierce and consistent support for our core values throughout the philanthropic sector. NCRP is the premier research and advocacy organization that works to ensure America's grant makers and wealthy donors are responsive to the needs of those who hold the least wealth, opportunity, and power. Aaron has a deep commitment to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in philanthropy, and is an expert in the benefits of funding advocacy and community organizing. His roots are in the work itself. Before joining NCRP, he worked for 15 years as a community organizer, and I do believe he's a former Veatch grantee partner in that work as well. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Carleton College and a master's degree in philanthropic studies from the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. He serves on the boards of Capital and Maine, as well as two amazing Veatch grantees, the Center for Popular Democracy and Repower. Aaron, thank you so much for your time and for all you put into preparing to be with us today. And I'm going to turn it over now to Aaron Dorfman.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joan. It's wonderful to be with you all. I'm so appreciative of what Veatch brings to the world and the work that you all do. So it's a pleasure. Sorry I couldn't come in person this time, but really good to be with you. I'm going to share a little bit about what's going on in social justice philanthropy writ large in the country, what we're seeing as we analyze the data. I'm going to share a little bit about how the rest of the field views the Veatch program. And I'm going to talk about 5 trends in philanthropy that I think you all should be aware of. Hopefully I will not talk for more than 20 minutes and we'll have lots of time for conversation. You can ask me anything that you want after that. So yeah, just great to be with you all. So what is going on with social justice philanthropy in the United States? Total giving in 2021 was about $485 billion. That includes giving from individuals, which is the largest share of donations, but 19% of that funding came from foundations and other institutional grant makers. So about $92 billion coming from foundations in domestic giving last year. And of that amount, we estimate that about 15% of those grant dollars were for social justice, very broadly defined. Those grants, those 92 billion in grants had some sort of social change, systems change purpose to them. They were not service delivery grants, for example. Now, we don't have a complete data set for 2021 to analyze, so that 15% is an estimate. But in 2019, the most recent year for which there is a full data set, the share of giving for social justice went up to 14%. And that's the highest it's been in quite some time. And we think it went up again in 2020 and 2021. So that's why we're estimating that it's at about 15% of foundation giving. It had been stuck at 9 or 10% since 2003. And then after Trump's election, we started to see some increases. So unexpected benefits of an otherwise horrible thing. So that means we estimate that last year foundations gave approximately 13.8 billion for social justice last year. Now, there has also been an increase in the number of what we consider serious social justice funders. And the threshold for serious is not as serious as the Veatch program is, where 99% of your grant dollars, if not 100%, are going for organizing and social justice work. Our threshold for a serious social justice funder is one who devotes at least 25% of their grant dollars for civic engagement, community organizing, advocacy, racial justice work, social movements, those kinds of activities. In 2003, only 65 out of the nation's largest 1,000 foundations met our threshold for being a serious social justice funder. And in 2019, that number has tripled. We are up to 180 out of the 1,000 largest foundations in the country that meet that 25% of grant dollars for social justice threshold, which is great news for your grantees. It means they have more funder prospects that they can look to. And it means the ecosystem that you're operating in is maybe a little bit different now than it was 15 years ago. But, 15% of total grant dollars and 180 out of 1,000 meeting our threshold, those are still far, far too low. Our nation is sorely in need of more funding for the kinds of activities that can really transform our society, and build a society where everyone thrives, where justice prevails, where fairness is the norm. So we're not at all satisfied with these numbers, even though it is pleasing to see that things are moving in the right direction. So where does all that money come from? The vast, vast majority of funding for social justice from foundations comes from endowed private foundations. The Ford Foundation, for example, gave out nearly $500 million in grants in 2019, most of it for social justice. Open Society Foundations, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and W.K. Kellogg Foundation also make up a huge proportion of that $13.8 billion that goes for social justice. Progressive public foundations that raise money every year and then give it out in grants, like your neighbors at the North Star Fund or the Liberty Hill Foundation in Los Angeles. Those organizations are terrific and they're important, but they really are a tiny, tiny share of social justice giving. None of them has really cracked the code on how these kinds of foundations can raise exponentially more dollars that they can then give away for social justice work. And I think part of the challenge is that donors really don't like to fund intermediary organizations. They want a direct relationship with the organizations that they're funding. And so every type of intermediary organization that raises money from individuals and then re-gives it to nonprofits is finding their market share declining. That's true for United Ways and workplace giving programs. That's true for the Combined Federal Campaign, which is the federal government employees' workplace giving program. Every organization, technology has allowed people to do their own research, find the nonprofits they want to support, and they tend to want to give to those groups directly. While I think there is always going to be an important place in the ecosystem for groups like North Star Fund, and they add a ton of value, I don't actually think their share of giving is going to go up much. It may continue to decline in the coming years. There's another funder that you all may know. You have a lot of the same grantees, the Need More Fund. their corpus has been shrinking steadily over the years, and they were looking at ways to deal with that challenge. And they explored really heavily, like, should we become a foundation that tries to raise money and then re-grant it to the grantees that we care about? And they looked into it very seriously and decided there's no upside there. They couldn't do it. They decided not to do it, and they're continuing to spend above the required mandated payout. And if that means they become a spend out foundation, they're okay with that. So just a trend in social justice philanthropy that I thought you all would want to be aware of. Yeah, let me talk about some other trends as well, and then I'll talk a little bit about how the field views Veatch. One trend is this increasing interest in funding social movements, in prioritizing marginalized communities, and in funding racial justice and social justice. The election of Trump correlated, as I said, with some of that increase. After the murder of George Floyd in 2020, we saw another surge of interest. My question is, will this last? Will these funders who are newer to caring about racial justice and social justice, will they stick with it for the long haul? We're sure doing everything we can to try to make sure that they do, but I think it's still an open question. Some of them will undoubtedly go back to other interests that they had before. Another trend I'm seeing is increasing adoption of some of the tenets of trust-based philanthropy, things like easing your application and reporting requirements, reducing that burden on the grantees. Super important, especially for smaller nonprofits. Every 10 hours they spend on a report or a proposal is 10 hours they don't spend organizing in the community. So funders, a lot of funders have figured out how to really streamline and only ask for the things they actually need. And that's a great trend. Another part of the trust-based philanthropy tenets is giving multi-year general operating support grants. We've seen an uptick in that. Our benchmark for foundations is that at least 50% of your grant dollars should be given in the form of general operating support. And currently 261 out of those 1,000 largest foundations meet our benchmark there, and that number has been increasing in recent years. Another trend is that I think boards of foundations, especially progressive foundations, are getting a clearer understanding of what their role is and how they add value to their philanthropy. So 10 years ago, I think the norm for progressive foundations was that all or most grants went to the board for approval. Huge dockets, 1,000-page books, and board members voting on each grant. The trend has been solidly away from that in recent years. Boards are giving more grant-making authority to the staffs that they hire, and the boards are then focusing on strategy, goals, overall budget, and about oversight of their executive director or CEO. Those are really important roles for boards to play. I think the field benefits from this. Board members are reporting greater satisfaction with serving on foundation boards because they're able to focus on strategy issues instead of the minutia of 100 approvals that need to get done at that meeting. And there has not been any corresponding dissatisfaction with the decisions that their staff are making on the board's behalf. So it's a big trend, and I think a better use of everyone's time. Another trend is mission investing. Those foundations that have an endowment corpus from which they are giving are trying to align their investment activities with the values of their institutions. So if a funder funds climate change and is really concerned about climate change, they make sure they are divesting of fossil fuel corporations. and they are investing in green energy companies. If a foundation cares about affordable housing in their community, they make sure some of their investment corpus is going into affordable housing development programs in their community, things like that, so that they're leveraging their investment capital to achieve their goals, in addition to deploying the grant making dollars to achieve their goals. It's been a good and positive trend that I'm seeing. And lastly, I think there's a real trend and a real interest in sharing power with the communities that progressive funders are most seeking to benefit. We have seen a number of previously all-white foundation boards, family foundations in the most cases, adding non-family members and people of color to their board to share power at the governance level. One of them, this is even coming from foundations that have been tremendous social justice funders over the years, like the Hill Snowden Foundation, a past winner of the NCRP Impact Awards. Until 3 years ago, the board was all family members and therefore all white. And they added 3 people of color, smart folks who've been in the movements that they fund for a long time. And the board members say it's making the board conversations richer and smarter, and they're really happy to have those additional perspectives on the board with them. So that's definitely a trend that I'm seeing. The Calibri Foundation there in New York did that recently as well. So sharing power at the governance level. There's other ways you can share power with grantees, like the multi-year general operating support grants are also a way to share power, right? You aren't holding that over them every year. Are you going to get renewed or not? So that's another way of sharing power. But the governance level is one I'm tracking and really interested in following that. So as Joan mentioned, I have a long history with the Veatch program. When I was a community organizer in Miami with a group called People Acting for Community Together, we were a Veatch grantee. And then since I came to NCRP 16 years ago, Veatch has been a consistent supporter. We've had Veatch employees on NCRP's board at various times over the years. So it's really been a great and wonderful partnership. So, Veatch's $13 million a year in annual giving may seem small in comparison to total social justice giving by US foundations, but it's still important. And it's not tiny. 13 million is a lot of money. You can do and have done a lot of good with that money. But I think understanding where you fit in the ecosystem is important as you try to think, how do we leverage our $13 million for the greatest benefit, for the greatest impact? And to that end, I think Veatch is incredibly well respected and well regarded among other progressive funders. You're viewed as smart and trusted, that you choose good grantees. It's almost like a grant from the Veatch program is a good housekeeping seal of approval for those grantees when they are approaching larger social justice funders. And that cannot be, the importance of that can't be overstated. Like a lot of the big foundations don't have nearly enough staff to do the due diligence on small and medium-sized organizing groups. And they're basically borrowing the due diligence that the Veatch program has done. And it's much easier for them to decide to go ahead and make a grant to those groups because they know the hard work that your team has done. So that adds a lot of value. And I think it makes larger progressive funders also stakeholders in what you guys do and how you do your work. Your laser focus on funding community organizing is unique and important. A lot of the 13 billion that I was talking about is campaign-driven or issue-driven funding for a specific set of goals for a limited period of time. There are far fewer funders that are building the people power necessary to transform our society. Those organizing groups that you fund year in and year out. And often those bigger funders borrow the power of the groups that you've been funding for decades when they want to win a big campaign. So take the Affordable Care Act as an example. Atlantic Philanthropies poured $26 million into a coalition of 1,000 grassroots groups that were working to pass the Affordable Care Act. Other large funders like the California Endowment also put in millions. But a lot of those groups were multi-issue organizing groups who'd been building power in their communities for years, and they were Veatch grantees. So those campaign-oriented funders, added resources to help win a really important campaign that moved our society forward, but they were also benefiting from that consistent commitment from Veatch that kept those groups strong and growing and thriving over the years. Yeah, I think those were the key points I wanted to make about how Veatch adds value to the space and the key trends that I'm seeing. Happy to have a dialogue and a conversation now.
Great, thank you, Aaron. What are your questions? And if you're on the Zoom, just kind of give a good wave. Can see you.
Thanks, Joan. Thank you for that. That was fantastic. Not being on the board, it was really interesting to hear your perspective, especially the role of Veatch in the philanthropic world. My question is about the board's role. I think you described it perfectly in terms of the workload that the board has. And I think that's been often an impediment to recruiting new board members. So my question to you is, I think you mentioned as boards pivot away from the approval process towards goals and strategies, could you talk a little bit more in detail about what that looks like?
Yeah, I think it's different from foundation to foundation, but if there is a funder that say really cares a lot about the pro-immigrant, pro-refugee movement and has a lot of grantees in that space, instead of spending 2 hours of a board meeting approving the grants, they could hear from some folks in the field about what are the challenges and opportunities that they're facing, and they might understand, and then they might have a strategy discussion about how could the foundation, add value, help overcome some of the challenges, or take advantage of the opportunities. So they'd be talking more about, the fields that they're in, how the foundation's work is having an impact, making a difference, and less about should we give this grant or that grant. A couple funders have written about this too. I can send to Joan later, their thoughts as they've written about what that transition looked like for them.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
How would you direct us in easing the application?
Janet, could you say right into the mic? Put it right in your mouth.
I have to point it to me. Okay. So the second trend you mentioned about the adoption of trust making, how do we ease the application process? And so that the board can be more strategy and goal driven.
Yeah, so I have not done your application myself in 16 years. Thankfully, I have staff for that, so I don't know how hard or onerous your application might be. But there are lots of good tips. The first thing is don't ask for anything that you already have from a previous year. Don't ask for things that you don't actually need in order to make a decision. So there were lots of instances of funders, asking for everything under the sun because their lawyers told them that they better have that. But it really wasn't necessary for decision-making process. So if those things are actually required to execute the grant, you can ask for that after a grant has been approved, rather than in the application process, so that at least those grantees that don't move forward. But the easiest thing is moving to multi-year grants. So if a group only has to apply every 2 years or every 3 years, that frees up staff time. Reports are often really, like, if you're really prescriptive in your reports about what you want, that can tend to take a lot more burden for the grantees. The most forward-thinking funders, especially if it's been a general operating support grant, will say, if you prepared an annual report, we'll take that as our report. If you prepared a report for another funder, we'll take that as the report. Or sometimes the report is, let's have a 30-minute phone conversation with your program officer, and our program officer will write up the report after your phone call. So instead of the executive director spending 2 hours writing the report, they spend 30 minutes on the phone with their program officer. And not only is the relationship deepened, they get another touch point, but the program officer probably gets more detail than they would from a written report. They get a better sense of how things are really going for that grantee. So those are some of the things. I think you've already stopped asking for budgets. Is that right? You did that a number of years ago. That can be super helpful. I don't know how that's been going for you, but just every additional thing you ask for is more time that your grantees are not spending on their work. And so I bet the staff can come up with good ways to streamline the process if you ask them to do that.
Yes, I've already seen that in the recent report.
Erin, do you have any insights from what the boards receive that helps them to do their work?
So all the fiduciary duties of most progressive foundation boards, most of that gets handled in committee. So there would be a finance committee of the board that goes in detail over the financial statements and things like that. So by the time it gets to the full board, it's a pretty the materials are there, but it's just the top line stuff. It's not the detail level reports. And then an analysis, like certainly a report on, like, if the board is not approving grants, you still want to know what's happening. So there should be in the docket, here are the 57 grants we've made since the last board meeting. So the board can see and be aware of, and certainly can ask any questions if they have any. And those grants, obviously should share what issue areas the grantee is working on, or however you group the grantees, just so the board has a sense of how the money is flowing throughout the year. And then I think some, like a thought piece, a framing thought piece from the executive director that really lays out, here's the stuff I'm wrestling with, and here are the strategic questions I'd like the board's input on. That can be make for a really engaging conversation.
Great, thank you. Ron, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. In terms of the operation, what we were talking about before, I mean, I have personally total confidence in the Beach staff in terms of their relationships with the grantees, in terms of working with them and streamlining the process. And they're the ones who really are, engaged with the grantees on that level. And I would support anything they do in terms of streamlining the process. I'm not sure if each is, to what extent we are literally unique, but we are certainly distinctive in that we're not a freestanding foundation. We're a program within an institution. And so that to me has been problematic in terms of the streamlining of the operations of the program. And I guess my question is, and I think this has come up before, and some of the things in your report here is deal with this issue. But for me, I think the issue is, how do we engage the congregation, and how do we streamline the process of working with the congregation? Because I get the sense that while I've always felt that the people we've had on staff on Veatch have been extraordinarily talented and skilled, but the extra burden I don't feel is on me as a board member, but on the staff of constantly engaging the congregation, and that there's another level of oversight, and I feel that we need to streamline that, and part of that I think is letting go of, and I dealt with this on a board level too, board of trustees level, which is recognizing that we are a large institution. This isn't this in 1950s or 60s. We have to let go of things, trust people to do their work, and let them do it. And I think that there are even questions like, when the staff and the board of Veatch come up with recommendations for grants, we have a process now. We've got to bring larger grants to the congregation. And I even question, the necessity of some of that. It's like, well, do we trust the board to make these decisions? And when we bring them before the congregation, okay, on one level, it's another aspect of engagement, and oversight. But is that really necessary? And does that really create a cumbersome process that makes it more difficult for our staff? And frankly, in terms of attracting new staff, as there is natural turnover over the years. I'm sorry I'm being a little long-winded here, but I think that's what I wanted to just bring out.
Yeah, no, that's a great question and good, good statement. Every 10 or 20 hours that Joan and the staff are sort of bringing things to the full congregation for approval is time they're not spent influencing the rest of the field of philanthropy, so that your grantees can get more money from other funders, or time spent doing other things. So as far as I'm aware, I don't know if there's bylaws of the congregation that require that you do it the way you're doing it right now, but certainly there could be no other reason than an internally imposed one that you're doing things the way that you do them now. There is no external requirement that you couldn't devolve decision-making away from the full congregation to the board, even away from the board to the staff for certain things. There are no legal prohibitions to it. It's only self-imposed ones. So it's totally up to you guys if you wanted to, make those shifts.
Thank you. Other questions?
I'm going to move us away from this piece of the discussion and really kind of go back to your mentioning that the Veatch program is one of the fewer funders who actually funds community organizing. And I know that you've done some work around what how to kind of look at the value of organizing, for a program like ours? How do we help us all to understand, that when we are doing something that is needed, but not necessarily seen as something that others want to fund for, how does that impact? What kind of impact does that have on the field? And also, what kind of value in all of this would you attribute to this particular dynamic?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. And I meant to talk about some of this research that we've done in my presentation, and I missed it. So thanks for getting back to it. So when I was newish here at NCRP, and I was talking to executive directors of a lot of foundations around the country about funding for organizing, for advocacy, for social justice work, I was asking them, well, why aren't you funding more? And the most common response I heard was, well, Aaron, I get it. I understand how funding those kinds of organizations benefits the community. But my trustees, they just want to help people, and they don't see how funding the rabble rousers actually makes a difference in people's lives. So after I heard that enough times, I said, you know what? NCRP can help solve this problem. We can help answer that question. So over a period of 3 years, we did a series of 7 studies in red states, in blue states, in urban areas, in rural areas, documenting the tangible benefits for families and communities when foundations invest in advocacy, community organizing, civic engagement work. And we actually found an incredible return on investment of 115 to 1 across the 7 study sites. So for every dollar that funders invested in those organizations, the community got back $115 in returns. So let me pull, I've got a screen share I can, if the host can enable screen sharing for me, great, and I'll share a graphic. Yeah, says disabled still. So anyway, there it is, great. Nope, wrong screen. Okay. Sorry about this. There we go. Here's the summary of the findings. These were our 7 study sites: New Mexico, North Carolina, Minnesota, Los Angeles, a multi-state region in the Pacific Northwest, Pennsylvania, and a multi-state region in the Gulf Mid-South.
Aaron, this is great. Can you make it a little bigger? Because we can't really read the numbers from here. Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Even bigger still.
Even bigger still. Let's see.
That's great. Thank you.
Is that showing? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, that's good.
So $230 million in total spending by these 110 nonprofits on their advocacy and their community organizing work. And when you took every policy win, this was over a 5-year period. When you took all of their policy wins during that 5-year period, and you monetize the benefits to the community of those policy wins, like let's say they won an increase in the minimum wage or an expansion of Medicaid benefits. You can monetize the benefits to the community of each one of those policy wins. When you add them all up, it was $26 billion in benefits off of that $231 million in spending. For that, that's how we got the return on investment of 115 to 1. You know, there is no other leverage factor in philanthropy other than this. I mean, sometimes research has incredible breakthroughs, like medical research will show a huge leverage factor. But this is really, if you care about equity and justice, like funding advocacy and community organizing and civic engagement is the way to leverage your limited dollars for maximum benefits to communities. It's really hard to disentangle the leverage factor for investments in community organizing versus advocacy. Really different strategies. They are complementary. And in fact, one of the things that our studies found was that in any one of those 7 sites, the sites that had a higher return on investment in their communities, they had more policy wins. It's where the whole ecosystem of organizations was better resourced. So those grass tops, professionalized advocacy organizations had resources, but so did the scrappier, smaller groups, often led by people of color, the organizing groups. They were better resourced. When all elements of the social change ecosystem were better resourced, you got better results, more impact. So I think continuing to target your funding at those organizations that maybe have a hard time raising money from larger, more mainstream progressive foundations is super important.
Thank you. Other questions? Diane or Patty or the staff online, any questions? Jane has her hand up. Jane?
Okay, it's on. Yeah, I just want to take a detour quickly for a minute and ask you, because there's some people here from the Veatch Engagement Committee, and I know I'm on the board, and we are going to be looking at this question over the next year or so about the structure of Veatch. And I know that's not really what we were talking about, but I just wanted to ask you, because of your vast experience with foundations, if you happen to know of other foundations that are congregationally sponsored, so to speak, and that we might look to just look at their structure.
Yeah, unfortunately, none are on the scale of yours. You are somewhat unique. I'm sure there are other giving programs that are connected to congregations, but none of them is giving out $13 million a year for social justice and community organizing. So they're not on my radar. But an interesting weird parallel example might be the Blue Shield of California Foundation. It's connected to the company, right? Blue Shield of California, the big insurance provider out there. So it's a corporate foundation. They get all their money. They get an operating budget every year from the corporation, but the corporation is completely hands-off. Like, they have given all the power to the board of that foundation to make the decisions, and they do great philanthropy because of it. Like, they are focused and they make a tremendous difference. We gave them our impact award a number of years ago as well. And we don't see that with other corporate foundations because the corporation meddles in the philanthropy. But by giving up control, they've actually got a foundation that produces tremendous benefits for the people of California, and I would argue better reputational benefits for the corporation itself, because it's having impact. People see that it's making a difference in the community, and that looks good for the corporation that provides the funding for it. And they don't feel like, the corporation doesn't feel like the foundation isn't accountable. They get reports, they get kept up to date on what's happening. So they're really happy with that, that they decided to get out of the way and really empower the foundation to do its work with less meddling from the corporation.
Thank you.
Getting in all my last questions here. The Veatch program, which you know very well, we're, have always been very value-based, and really align our way of funding with the mission and vision of the congregation here. I think in looking at some of the material online about your organization, it looks as if you are also very focused on looking at value-based funding and what that looks like. And so it seems maybe part of what I was hearing you say before was that you're starting to see more of a shift, not only that it's general support, but then there's also a way of looking at values and looking at empowerment and, leadership development. And where does that all kind of come together? What's your thinking about it these days?
Yeah, it comes together in some really important ways. I think a lot of it is driven by if the people involved in the philanthropy have a serious commitment to actually improving people's lives and making things different. If you're rigorous about looking at the impact the foundation has, you just move further and further along this continuum. So an example would be the California Endowment, now one of the best social justice funders in the country. 15 years ago, when Dr. Robert Ross took over as their CEO, he was coming from a medical background, and they're a health foundation, and so they funded a lot of programs, medical interventions, things to improve the health of Californians. But as he engaged rigorously with, are we actually making a difference funding all these programs? He found that they weren't, and that the real problem was a lack of power for marginalized people in California, and that's what was driving unhealthy outcomes. So they've totally shifted. All their funding is now for power building and advocacy and movement building and community organizing work. But it came from engaging seriously with trying to understand, are we making a difference on the things that we say we care about? And for most foundations that I've seen change or evolve, that's where it stems from. The other key piece is that someone has to drive the change. It's got to be at least one trustee, or it's got to be the executive director or CEO of the foundation. Someone has to say, we can do better for the things that we care about, and they really, just make sure that everybody has that conversation and that the decisions get made that need to be made to move things forward. So I'm always on the lookout for who is that person at this foundation or that foundation that maybe wants to take them in a better direction. I've got one in a Midwestern city now with just over $1 billion in assets that's like moving a little bit towards being willing to fund more advocacy and organizing work. And so I'm trying to help her behind the scenes as much as I can, because she is the president of the foundation. So, but she's got to bring this board that is used to doing things the same way for 20 years along with her. So, but yeah, I'm always looking for folks like that I can help them have a really good conversation with the other stakeholders in their institution.
Thank you. In our last couple of minutes, I just want to make sure that our participants online, or perhaps again, invite our guests, Mary, Lauren, Peter, if there's anything else that you want to add, anybody who hasn't spoken. Any hands online, Diane or Patty? You guys are good? Anyone?
I'd just like to say that I found this incredibly informative and inspiring. So I have a lot of ideas to work with. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane. Others? Yes? Anybody? Hmm? Mhm. Yeah. Any other questions? Erin, I have one last question for you. And you spoke a little bit earlier about, you mentioned payout. And I wonder if you could help us to understand what some of the issues are related to payout for a foundation. How much are they required to give? What are the trends that you're seeing? And how might that inform some of our thinking about impact here at Veatch?
Sure. The requirement for foundations that have actual private foundation status is 5% of the value of the corpus of the assets. So $1 billion foundation is required to give out $50 million a year in grants. That is the floor, not the ceiling, and it's calculated using a 5-year rolling average of assets in most cases. And if you pay ahead in 1 year, you can pay less in another year. But the simple way to think about it is 5%, 5% of the assets. There has been a movement of more giving while living and faster payout rates. So Chuck Feeney, the founder of Duty Free Shops, founded Atlantic Philanthropies and really sparked the giving while living movement. He has now given away all $8 billion, like the entire assets of the foundation have been spent out. So there's a subset of foundations that are embracing a spend down philosophy where they try to spend out everything. Others just try to match their spending rate with what they're trying to accomplish in the world and what the circumstances are in the world right now. So Dimple Abichandani, who heads the General Service Foundation, wrote a great piece about the evolution of their board's thinking on their payout. And in times of urgency and crisis, they're paying more like 7 or 8% instead of 5%. But in most cases, one of the decisions that a private foundation board will make is, what's our payout rate going to be for the coming year? That's one of the votes that the board takes if they don't have a policy that governs that for a long time. Some big private foundations like the Ford Foundation, they stick really closely to the 5%. The Hewlett Foundation as well. They want not only to maintain their assets in perpetuity, they think that's the best decision for the causes that they care about, but they want to maintain the purchasing power of those assets in perpetuity, which means they want to see their corpus growing so that their grant making is growing over the years as well. But Ford also realized with the pandemic and the racial reckoning that our country was going through, that there was a real opportunity to make a difference on some of the issues that they cared about. So rather than liquidating some of the corpus, they issued bonds, issued debt to get an extra $1 billion into the foundation that they then gave out over 2.5-3 year period, upping their annual giving by an extra $300 million a year. So it's a lot of progressives think that the 5% mandated minimum payout should be increased. Our organization, before I took over, advocated that very strongly. And there was a bill in Congress pending on it, but it didn't pass. So our position now is that on a voluntary basis, a private foundation should give out 6% in grants only, and then spend whatever they need to on their own operations to carry out that work. A lot of the program officer salaries and things like that count towards the 5% too. So a lot of foundations are actually giving out in grants more like 4%. And our position is that it should be at least 6%.